Hello, welcome everybody to the Inherit webinar, How to Make Your Museum Green. My name is Ioanna Hadjikosti, and I'm the Director of the Bank of Cyprus Cultural Foundation and the Coordinator of the Horizon 2020 Reinherit project. With me today presenting this webinar will be Dr. Marios Valiandis, an expert on environmental issues with a rich background both in academic and corporate history. Before we begin, I would like to thank Paolo Mazzanti and Marco Bertini from Unifi MIC for organizing this webinar series. You have to know that this webinar will be recorded, and in case you have any questions during this webinar, you can add them in the chat and they will be answered by the end of the webinar. Before we begin, I would like your attention for you to watch a very short video on Reinherit and its the partners involved and its target. As you might have understood, Inherit aims to create a digital cultural heritage ecosystem where all the key stakeholders will have an open and collaborative space to experiment, share, and innovate. So tools and resources will be available for all. This is a good example with our webinar here. I have to tell you that at least in my part of the webinar, I was based on the work by Inherit, especially on the literature review performed by University of Nicosia. And I will now give the speech to Marios Vagianis. We start with Marios.
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for Inherit for having me presenting. Our agenda today will cover the areas of climate change, the science, some of the EU policies and strategies on how we ended up with the climate change and how to protect. Then we will continue with the area of museums and environmental challenges and the role of museums on the environment, and then on how to go green in terms of the museums and what challenges we will be faced in doing that. So let me start with the climate change, the science, just to understand why this is important. Let me start with two very simple words, weather versus climate. So what's weather? Every night when we watch the news, we see the weather forecast. So we have a forecast for every day. So weather is the state of the atmosphere at a particular place during a short period of time. So it changes, it's a short period of time. Whereas climate is defined as an area's long-term weather patterns. So the simplest way to describe climate is to have a look at average temperature and precipitation over time. So I'm talking to you from Cyprus. So Cyprus, the climate that we have here is what we call a Mediterranean climate with 4 seasons, let's say. So we have mild winters, we have hot summers, we have couple of months that we have autumn and a couple of months for spring. So continuing. So what is climate change then? Climate change, it refers to long-term shifts in these temperatures and weather patterns. And these shifts have been caused on two, basically either by natural causes, such as the sun's activity, and we'll see this on the next slide, or due to eruptions caused by large volcanoes, as we had in 2010 in Iceland. But the most important cause of climate change is the human activities. It's the main driver, and human activities primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, due to deforestation, and due to land use change. So, for example, if you think of what we do every day when we drive to work or when we take the bus, let's say, all these, the buses, the vehicles, and everything that they burn fossil fuel, we have an impact on climate change. So we have the greenhouse effect, and we need to monitor the greenhouse gases that they cause climate change. So what is the greenhouse effect? We have something that we call a good greenhouse effect and a bad greenhouse effect. So the good greenhouse effect, what happens? We have the solar radiation that the sun has its rays and they come down to Earth. And then most of them reflect back in the atmosphere. Some of them, they stay back to the Earth. And this is what we call the good greenhouse effect, because without those sun rays that they are absorbed by the Earth, then our temperature would not be habitable. However, because of our man-made uh, causes, like we release in the atmosphere lots of CO2, so carbon dioxide, which creates a layer which absorbs more of the sun's radiation, and hence we have the greenhouse effect. So we have the increase in temperature, and this is what we need to do to monitor it. And this is why we need to monitor it. So, because of the greenhouse effect, we have climate change, which gives you changes in the sea level. Because of the melting of the glaciers, the sea level will rise. We have severe weather effects, so we may have heavy rainfall across the globe or extreme droughts in other parts of the earth. We may have declining crop productivity. We may have changes in ecosystems. We may have hurricanes. I used to live in New Orleans. We had hurricanes almost every year between June to October. We have rise in temperature, and I can tell you from a recent study we had, especially in Cyprus from 2010 to 2020, the temperatures of 42 to 44 degrees during summertime has increased a lot in the last 10 years. So we may have 10 days straight having more than 40 degrees centigrade, which is it is a problem, especially for senior people. And, or we may have the acidification of seawater. So, sorry. So, because of that, the European Union came back with some policies and strategies related to how we will control these uh, greenhouse gases and hence mitigate climate change. And let me start with this. There is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. There is this group which consists of 500 plus uh, specialists on climate change, scientists, that they produce the fifth report. So every couple of years or every 5 years, they produce a report on climate change. And in 2014, they managed to present this report with evidence, with comprehensive scientific analysis, that was with 95% proof that there is no longer any doubt that human activities play a very large role to the contribution of climate change. So this is like in 2014, for the first time, there was no doubt that human activities create this increase in the temperature in both the atmospheres and the seas. So it is us and uh, on what and what we do every day that creates this climate change. Sorry. And because of that, the European Union came back in October 2014 and created the energy strategy with some major goals and targets for 2030. So they introduced the 40% reduction in CO2 emissions compared to the 1990 levels, for example, that all the EU member states need to follow. So let me talk a little bit more on this target. It's not a very easy target because in 1990, we there were a lot of people that we didn't even have a mobile phone. Okay, that the mobile needs electricity to be charged. Electricity is created through the burning of fossil fuel, which creates CO2 emissions. So our energy needs in 1990 were a lot less than what we have now. Plus the fact that in 1990 the population was a lot less than what it is in 2023, this makes it even more difficult to achieve this 40% reduction in our energy needs. Furthermore, another goal is to increase the renewable penetration to all member states to 27%. So renewable penetration will be to have to produce electricity from wind or from photovoltaic cells, and also increase energy efficiency to 27% as well by 2030. Not all member states will be able to achieve this in the next 7 years. Keep going. Now, this is a very nice picture. So this is John Kerry holding his granddaughter. John Kerry used to be the former US Secretary of State. He's holding his granddaughter and he's signing something. What is he signing? He's actually signing the Paris Agreement, which the Paris Agreement happened in 2015. It was a climate change conference of the parties where more than 200 uh, countries participated. And the Paris Agreement, there was a pact, like an agreement with most of the countries of these 200 countries, and United States was one of them, to sign this agreement, which states that governments must hold the temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius by 2100 and try to limit it even further to 1.5 degrees. Now, this is very interesting because the way we consume fossil fuel and the way climate change happens, the average temperature, if the average temperature rises above 2.0 degrees Celsius, it means that some of the islands in the oceans may disappear. So this is what the studies show, and this is very important. So in order to achieve this, according to the Paris Agreement, from 2050 onwards, carbon dioxide emissions must be reduced to the levels that forests can absorb. So this means that anything we have on carbon dioxide must be absorbed exactly and have a net zero balance. And the other thing is that from 2020, developed countries must provide 100 billion a year in aid to help developing countries switch to clean energy sources. So it's not cheap to go green. Strong countries with high economies must support the poor countries to invest in these clean energy sources in order to be able for the whole world to hold the temperature rise below the 2 degrees Celsius by 200. Continuing on December 11, 2019, the European Union announced its Green Deal. So this Green Deal was developed to face the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation, but also to help achieve this Paris Agreement, so the goals of climate neutrality by 2050. So what that Green Deal tells us is that the EU will provide financial support and technical assistance to those countries most affected by the transition to the green economy. So it's all about, again, helping poor countries invest in clean technologies, renewable technologies in order to reduce their carbon footprint and the emissions. And on top of that, in 14th of July 2021, the European Union, as part of the Green Deal, set itself another binding goal of achieving the neutrality by or the neutrality of 2050, but by the goal of what they call the Fit for 55. So this is an intermediate step towards climate neutrality, and it increases its ambition to reduce emissions by at least 55% in 2030 instead of 40% that I showed you in the previous slide, meaning that we need, as Europeans, to try more in order to be carbon neutral. Again, this is not very easy, but it has to happen. On October 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, those people that I just mentioned to you before, the 500 scientists, prepared their next report, the sixth report, which again showed a major conclusion that the only way to limit global warming is to achieve the net zero CO2 emissions globally by 2050. So we are not there yet. The gap remains. There are huge atmospheric CO2 concentrations were calculated in 2019 that were higher than any other time for the last 2 million years. So yes, rich countries need to mobilize 100 billion a year to help finance poor countries invest in green technologies if we want to save the planet, literally. In November 2021, there was another meeting of the climate change of the United Nations with all the 200 countries. And Sir David Attenborough from UK, which is one of the top of the top people that they care a lot about the environment, mentioned the following, and I will show you exactly in a video. Hold on.
Your Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as you spend the next 2 weeks debating, negotiating, persuading, and compromising, as you surely must, it's easy to forget that ultimately the emergency climate comes down to a single number: the concentration of carbon in our atmosphere. The measure that greatly determines global temperature. And the changes in that one number is the clearest way to chart our own story, for it defines our relationship with our world. For much of humanity's ancient history, that number bounced wildly between 180 and 300. And so too did global temperatures. It was a brutal and unpredictable world. At times, our ancestors existed only in tiny numbers. But just over 10,000 years ago, that number suddenly stabilized, and with it, Earth's climate. We found ourselves in an unusually benign period, with predictable seasons and reliable weather. For the first time, civilization was possible, and we wasted no time in taking advantage of that. Everything we've achieved in the last 10,000 years was enabled by the stability during this time. The global temperature has not wavered over this period by more than plus or minus 1 degree Celsius. Until now. Our burning of fossil fuels, our destruction of nature, our approach to industry, construction and learning are releasing carbon into the atmosphere at an unprecedented pace and scale. We are already in trouble. The stability we all depend on is breaking. This story is one of inequality as well as instability. Today, those who've done the least to cause this problem are being the hardest hit. Ultimately, all of us will feel the impact, some of which are now unavoidable.
My world is melting.
You think you have control, we actually have no control.
I'm absolutely terrified to bring a child to this world.
Is this how our story is due to end? A tale of the smartest species doomed by that all too human characteristic of failing to see the bigger picture in pursuit of short-term goals. Perhaps the fact that the people most affected by climate change are no longer some imagined future generation, but young people alive today. Perhaps that will give us the impetus we need to rewrite our story, to turn this tragedy into a triumph. We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever existed on Earth. We now understand this problem. We know how to stop the number rising and put it in reverse. We must recapture billions of tons of carbon from the air. We must fix our sights on keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. A new industrial revolution, powered by millions of sustainable innovations, is essential and is indeed already beginning. We will all share in the benefits: affordable clean energy, healthy air, and enough food to sustain us all. Nature is a key ally. Wherever we restore the wild, it will recapture carbon and help us bring back balance to our planet. And as we work to build a better world, we must acknowledge no nation has completed its development, because no advanced nation is yet sustainable. All have a journey still to compete, so that all nations have a good standard of living and a modest footprint. We're going to have to learn together how to achieve this, ensuring none are left behind. We must use this opportunity to create a more equal world, and our motivation should not be fear, but hope.
Can we fix climate problem in one generation? My answer would be yes, we have to.
We need to not just to talk about what we can do, but to do what we can.
This is a challenge that we should try to solve in a quick way with a long-term vision.
It comes down to this: the people alive now, the generation to come, will look at this conference and consider one thing: did that number stop rising and start to drop as a result of commitments made here? There's every reason to believe that the answer can be yes. If, working apart, we are a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it. In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellency, is why the world is looking to you and why you are here. Thank you.
So, very interesting presentation by Sir David Attenborough. And one of the key messages is that he said at the very last, during my lifetime, I saw a terrible decline. In your own lifetime, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. So all of us need to work together to deal with climate change and achieve this reduction in global temperature. Now, I leave it to Ioanna to continue.
Thank you, Marios. It was an excellent speech, disturbing at times, but very hopeful as well. Let's see now. Can I turn to the presentation? Yes. Can actually museums, do museums have a role to play in this? Can museums help us going towards this modest footprint we should be leaving on the environment? We'll also start with a very small video at this point. This was a very inspiring video from Museo Prado and WWF discussing this possibility that if climate changes, then everything changes. And going back to the questions, why museums matter in this aspect? What can we do as museum professionals to help reverse this situation? We have the momentum with museums these days. It's that they can actually find their place in the global agenda, entering different kinds of social discussions. One of them is the environment discussion. Museums, anyway, since their first invention, are shaping our view of the world because they help us understand who we are and the world in which we live. They help to place us in a chain in the environment we live after several generations of people and several generations of younger people coming after us. They influence how we think and the way in which we behave. And they are thus uniquely placed to help change attitudes. This is becoming, as the years progress, the main focus of museums, how to help change attitudes towards all sorts of contemporary issues. So in this sense, museums might actually be ideally placed to make a difference in environmental issues. Before focusing on what museums can actually do, we should not be forgetting one great challenge that exists, the environmental challenge for all museums and sites. The greatest fear of all museum professionals is the loss of cultural heritage or parts of it due to climate changes. This has often been motivating museums to consider renewable resources. But the fact is that no matter how hard we try fighting against this climate change, not all cultural heritage will be sustained with this set of specific rules. We wanted it to be sustained. For example, in coastal cities, cultural heritage will be facing problems, and the climate emergency all around the world will make us reconsider as museum professionals or as heritage sites experts, how much of this cultural heritage can we actually save? How much of it can we actually preserve? And there will come a time that we will be forced to make some difficult choices in this aspect. What will we be prioritizing to save? These are some of the main questions that are troubling us here at the foundation, because we have two museums and we are examining possibilities in cases of emergencies. What are we going to be saving, and how good, in what shape we will be able to save it. This agenda of 2030, transforming our world, by the ICOM Norway with ICOM UK, came up with this resolution that aligns museums' work with the United Nations SDG goals. It's easy for us to discuss the goals. We are all very familiar with them by now. But on behalf of museums, the important thing is that we should now consider this as an amazing opportunity to benefit and find our role to play in this changing world. To find the way to create this modest footprint that David Attenborough was talking about. Some issues to address as food for thought for all of us here. How the cultural heritage sector deals with important issues that are related to climate and environmental concerns at this point. The response of the sector to this evolving environmental emergency is pointing out that institutions are now encouraged to play a leading role globally, acting as agents of positive change. And this is a role that we must be, in a very daring way, stand up and take action with it. How to present innovative sustainability and climate action practices that can be integrated in an easy way into various aspects of museums, cultural institutions, and sites. Should we stress the need for the creation of networks of communication that facilitate museums and help them to expand their climate work? There have been actually several efforts to create a variety of networks globally or locally to help join forces against this increasing danger. But even though many good efforts have been established and shared approaches have been created, we still have not resulted in significant change. There is still a lot of way to go. Should we highlight the importance then of energy management in museums and other cultural institutions, which should operate in a more eco-conscious manner? Should we place emphasis on the impact of climate change on monuments, archaeological sites, and historical buildings? Should we assist professionals in the challenge they face using the state-of-the-art literature in the area? Or should we do all of the above? Let's have a closer look at what we can actually do. How should museums and sites tackle this environment challenge? It should be placed in the wider context, actually, of cultural heritage management, which is something that, for us museum professionals, it's something that we love and we work very hard for. You see the example of the Green Museum Summit that was organized this year by Museum Next as a very important step towards this direction. And we must all admit that there is a need here for cultural heritage professionals to find sustainable funding to pay their energy bills, to revisit and adapt environmental plans to each museum's own capacity, of course, to reduce energy consumption, to improve sustainability of the buildings. That's a difficult thing with museums. We'll go back to it later. To find alternative energy sources and to have guidance on how to address the energy and the cost of living of this crisis. Going through the literature, roles that museums can play in their communities regarding the environment that can actually be very important is to present lessons from the past. This is something we can actually do very well, and it's part of our mission. To pose questions about the future and provide inspiration for the future, often using the past. To take steps to close this gap between change and climate justice. The thing with museums these days is that they are actually striving with their social issues to create a more just world with equity for all people, to build concern and empathy for people, for culture, for places, and for the wildlife, to bring together the public, the policymakers, the researchers, and others, many more others, to shape and implement locally relevant and effective strategies and locally relevant effective plans for climate change, while at the same time having our mind on the global problem. Museums, cultural institutions, and sites as educational bodies can include in their mission to convey this important message and disseminate the message for environmental concerns in order to inspire people and activate individual and collective agency. We can also work a lot with children through our educational programs, because we all know that young adults and children are very important for the coming years, and their perception of how to handle the environmental crisis will be critical for all of us. We should create collections, exhibitions, education programs, as well as undertake a variety of campaigns. This should be easy for us. And community engagement activities. These activities can be used as a vehicle to raise awareness, to inspire climate action, to build and share knowledge about human impacts on environment and climate, as well as teach skills.
Right. So let's see what we can do in terms of going green, in terms of focusing on energy efficiency and sustainability in museums, and reduce our carbon footprint, the museum's carbon footprint. Some easy tasks that are related with electricity, with paper usage, water usage, buildings, and lighting. So simple stuff like using less air conditioning. Printers should be default set to print on both sides of the paper and reuse paper when possible. Good ventilation in the buildings or lights. Any unnecessary computers, printers, and laboratory equipment should be turned off overnight, not leaving on standby because it's still using a lot of electricity. Replacing dead light bulbs with energy efficient alternatives in places, or if able to use natural light, then do it. Increase electronic communication than printing and sending paper-based communication. Museums should regularly conduct an energy audit because it should be regularly analyzed to determine the carbon footprint of the museums, and be able to set an action plan on how to reduce this carbon footprint. In terms of water, rinsing treatments should be revised to assess water flow, duration, and potential for reuse of rinsed water. Temperature settings for air conditioning or for heating should be according to human comfort, not extreme. Environmental standards for collection should be reviewed to identify potential energy savings. Adaptation should be made to the building to reduce energy loss, such as insulation and draft reduction, and any alternative sources of green energy production, like having photovoltaic cells on top of the roofs, should be considered and utilized. They may be easy practices. There are challenges, though, with these practices because museums may not have adequate facility staff or budget to handle these things. Not all museum staff may be aware of the benefits of energy and water efficiency, so training should be done so that they know what is happening, what is out there, the possibilities, and what they can use in terms of technology. Challenges may be in lack of building system zoning control to point to degrees of waste. Sometimes we may have unexpected visitor surge in the museums that could add burden to systems designed for different parameters like heating systems or ventilation systems. And due to collection care requirements, many museums need to maintain a regulated range of temperature and humidity around the clock, which will be more energy reliable. Joanna, you want to put the...
We have a good example from the Natural History Museum of how they handled their turning green effort, and I like the way they handled it and the way they communicated this to their audiences. So let's have a look at it.
We're becoming a greener museum for a greener planet. Our science shows how human activity is changing nature. So we want to do our bit and reach net zero as fast as we can. We're tackling our greenhouse gas emissions and switching to sustainable technologies. Our energy is already sourced sustainably, so we'll be working to reduce our energy intensity by 40%. We'll be asking our suppliers to join us in working in a way that's kinder to people and planet. This includes our shop, where we'll reduce plastic packaging and create sustainable product ranges. We also want to be responsible about waste. So, by 2023, we'll increase our average recycling rate from 47% to at least 60%. Our staff will only use air travel when necessary and take green transport as much as possible. We'll help to conserve one of Earth's most precious resources by reducing our water consumption by 20%. We also want to make our money work for good. Food in our cafes should only have a small impact on nature, so we'll keep using sustainably sourced produce. New projects in the museum will be more sustainable from the beginning, and all new buildings will be net zero carbon. There are no shortcuts when it comes to reducing our impact on the environment. Join us on our journey to create a greener museum.
Excellent.
I failed to mention earlier the role of smart tourism in this upcoming way of handling this crisis and the benefits for environment. Actually, smart tourist destinations that involve systems that allow for self-sufficiency, like green areas, improved water and air quality, and sustainable mobility, might be very important in the coming years for both sites and museums. I think, should we at this point, Maria, open this survey? We have a small survey for the attendees to complete. Let me see if I can start it now. Did I manage to start it? Yeah, I think yes. Let's give it some more time. Scroll down for all 3 questions. Maria, can you see the results to share them with us when the survey is over? We give it another, I think, can we end voting now?
We're waiting, yeah.
And we can share results. I'll leave the results to you.
So we have 50% of the voting. Okay. Okay, I think there is no other voting, so let's go through it. So do you think climate changes affects your life? Yes, 50%, yeah, that they replied, they said yes, correct. Do you think that museums have a role to play in handling climate change? Yes, of course, everybody said yes, from the 50%. In what ways can museums help in saving the environment? So 29% said energy efficiency, 36% educational programs, 21% research, and 29% through staff training. All of them are correct, and they are closely, so the percentages are evenly out, so all of 4 of them needed. So, yeah.
I would say, looking at the last question and the answers, that perhaps this points to the fact that each museum should focus on its strongest point. For example, if I have a small museum and I can do little for energy saving, perhaps I can do more for educational programs. I think each museum should count its resources and see what works better for them, if not combining them all. So thank you for your feedback on the survey. Some last comments concerning Reinherit, the program that brought us here together in this webinar. Reinherit aspires to make a contribution to this environmental discussion. We will be creating and using a lot of digital content, and even the e-shop provided by Reinherit for the partners will be facilitated online, totally with online products only, helping museums find new ways to increase their impact while reducing their footprint. We have this training course on how to use our digital tools, and this webinar on how to be inspired on environmental policies and plans, and the development of many strategies and tools for sustainable smart tourism and an app related to it. You can find all of them along with the presentation of best practices on alternative energy sources on our website, reinherithub.eu. Maria, some concluding remarks?
Yes. So, for sure, climate change is here and it's going to stay. We can still tackle climate change, not that late. We need to all help each one of us to help go carbon neutral by 2050 in order to achieve the reduction and not the increase in average temperature by less than 1.5 degrees centigrade. Museums play also a major role in this because they represent the world's heritage. They need to teach people and show the way how we will all try and build on how we protect the environment and how we will tackle climate change. Every little helps, and we need to start acting now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marius. Just to add that as museums, we are ideally situated to make this connection between past, present, future. That is the most critical link for sustainability anyway. Thank you all for being here. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat. I have to thank Marius for being here, Paolo for being with us 24/7 preparing this. And if there are no more questions, let us all keep walking to the right direction, helping museums to become important in their social role, including this environmental crisis and many other social roles we might carry in the forthcoming years. So thank you all for being here. We'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, even in the Reinherit forum, to continue the discussion there. Hope you have a nice day.
Thank you.
Let's call